One of the things you started discussing was the issue of stress and how that affects essentially the development of the baby. Right. Can you tell me a little bit about that connection and tell me about contextually where that issue of stress is most prevalent or is the biggest concern?
Sure. I mean, it just blew my mind when I started learning about this. So prenatal stress, chronic stress in the prenatal period has awful consequences for fetal development. And the most direct correlation has been elevated cortisol chronically or chronic stress shrinks the frontal lobe of baby's brain. The frontal lobe is responsible for a lot of key functions. And we've seen the anatomy of the brain actually shrink. And so if you think about who's stressed in the world, it could be a developing world scenario or a developed world scenario. I mean, mothers are stressed. Pregnancy is the body's first stress test. It is, I think, complicated in our current universe by a lot of other factors. But the outcomes are directly correlated to what kind of baby gets born.
I mean, one thing is you talk about stress. I mean, I think about most of my life, I felt I've worked in a stressful environment. Tell me a little bit about pregnant mothers' stress in the workplace, because I expect for a lot of corporations that this is going to come as quite the revelation. They're going to ask themselves, well, what can we do about it?
Sure. Well, corporations need to do their fair share, and I think right now they're not. I've heard hundreds of stories from real life, working while pregnant. The challenges are just, it really is unfair, frankly, to put such a burden on a working mom. Frankly, the paid leave policies of most companies are inadequate. Pregnancy is considered a disability. The majority of women that I know use vacation days. And these are things that aren't really thought about holistically. They're kind of solved for in an ad hoc way. And I think what we need to do is introduce a comprehensive solution that's not just looking at one issue like paid leave or returnships or any of these kind of issues as one-offs and say, what should it actually be like? What should the entire experience be like when you're employed and pregnant? And start from that basic principle question and don't solve for things in an ad hoc way, in a one-dimensional way when there are 50 other dimensions to consider. And so I think resetting the whole way we approach this experience is important.
Can you tell me a little bit about how the lab is going to be at the service of the working mom?
Sure. So, the lab exists to basically ask these fundamental questions and hit reset on these approaches because they're very incremental. And what we're seeing is the incrementalism fails. We need to radically rethink how we approach pregnancy and in every context, not just the working mom. But what the lab will do is introduce a comprehensive outline or checklist of what the working mom experience should be like. So everything from HR policy to office conditions to home conditions, because all those will matter to how a working mom's health is. And it'll help employers as well. And that's one of the things that I think employers need to understand, that there are massive losses in productivity, in revenue, in ability to recruit and retain the best talent. And women are a massive part of our workforce, and employers are missing I think a huge opportunity to lead on this issue.
How do we go about, as a species, maximizing human potential? This lab, from what you've talking about, could be a great agent in this. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about your hopes and aspirations for the lab in the collaboration with Humanity 2.0?
Sure. I mean, I think the lab will be, frankly, something massive in terms of impact and in terms of shifting the narrative. And I do think, since it is unprecedented, we really don't know a lot about how it will work around the world and solve for things. And I think that's just being sincere and straightforward, that it's a great strategy, but the tactics remain to kind of be developed. I think the idea that it could take a systems view and ask a few fundamental principle questions of how the pregnancy experience should be. What is the ideal maternal environment? Let's not move to other questions until we solve this. There are no more important questions. And so what ends up happening is the narrative gets kind of reactionary. So we solve individual problems all the time, or issues within pregnancy, and the square root of the problem is not really addressed. So to me, the most important question to answer is, what should it be like on this planet to reproduce a healthy life? It's that simple. Let's not get into any other issues until we answer that.
Morad, Dr. Ann, thank you so much. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I wish you guys all the best with Square Roots and the lab. It's been extraordinary.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.